wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She had dreamed about it for years. The dress, the vows, the love that would last forever. Surrounded by family and friends, everything seemed perfect. She was marrying the man she thought was the love of her life. But little did she know, this day would be the start of her worst nightmare. The man she married was hiding a dark secret, a secret so terrifying it would change everything. What if the person you trusted the most wasn't who they seemed? What if the man she married was a killer? And what if the honeymoon they'd dreamed of would never have a return? The day was perfect, or at least it seemed that way. The sun bathed everything in a golden light, casting a glow over the white dress, the carefully arranged flowers, and the smiling faces of friends and family. But above all, the man standing at the altar was everything she had ever dreamed of. He was everything she had ever wanted, handsome, charming, and full of promise. He looked at her with such warmth in his eyes, it felt like the world had stopped spinning, just for them. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for her entire life. She had pictured it 1,000 times in her head, but nothing compared to the reality of walking down the aisle, feeling her heart race as she saw him standing there, waiting for her. The vows were exchanged, each word more meaningful than the last, and when he kissed her, it was as if the world itself held its breath. It was a kiss that promised forever, a kiss that sealed their love and their future together. After the ceremony, they left for their honeymoon, the start of their new life. She was filled with excitement, ready for the adventures that awaited them. They were finally going to be together, just the two of them, away from everything. It was supposed to be a dream come true, the beginning of a beautiful journey. But as they drove away, something shifted. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A feeling she couldn't explain. Something in the way he looked at her, something in his smile, made her heart race, not with joy, but with unease. She pushed it aside, telling herself it was just nerves. After all, she had just married the man she loved. What could possibly go wrong? But as the miles passed, the feeling only grew stronger. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like a whisper in the back of her mind, a nagging thought that wouldn't go away. She glanced at him, and for a moment, she saw something in his eyes. Something dark, something cold, hidden behind that perfect smile. It made her stomach churn, but she quickly dismissed it. She was just overthinking. It was supposed to be the happiest time of her life, so why was she feeling this way? The honeymoon was supposed to be their escape, their perfect getaway. But as they arrived at their destination, the unease grew. The resort was beautiful, everything she had imagined, but it felt wrong. Something about the way he acted, the way he seemed distracted at times, left her feeling like she was walking on thin ice. Every time she asked him what was on his mind, he would smile and brush it off. But it wasn't just his words. It was the way he said them, like he was hiding something. It wasn't until later that night, when she found a small detail that didn't add up, that she realized the truth. She had missed something important, something she should have seen. But it was too late. The man she had married, the man she had trusted with her heart, was hiding something far darker than she could ever have imagined. And as the truth began to unfold, she realized the honeymoon they had dreamed of would be the last time she would ever feel safe. As they arrived at the remote resort, it was like stepping into a dream. The kind of place you only see in postcards. Crystal clear waters, endless stretches of soft white sand, and the sound of the waves gently crashing against the shore. It was everything she had imagined, a paradise far away from the world, just the two of them, together in bliss. The air smelled fresh and salty, the sun warming her skin, and for a moment, it seemed like nothing could go wrong. But as they walked towards the resort, something didn't feel right. It was subtle, like a crack in an otherwise perfect picture. The resort was beautiful, no doubt, but there was a strange emptiness to it, the kind of silence that felt too still, like the calm before a storm. She couldn't quite explain it, but the more she looked around, the more she felt like something was lurking just beneath the surface, something she couldn't see, but could feel deep in her bones. The air, though warm, felt thick, heavy with something she couldn't name. It wasn't the tropical heat. It was something else, something unsettling. The beach was deserted, the ocean was eerily still, and the resort staff seemed distant, their smiles too practiced. She told herself it was just nerves. After all, this was supposed to be the happiest time of her life. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. It clung to her, like a shadow following her every step. Her husband, the man she had just married, seemed distant too. At first, she thought it was just the exhaustion from the wedding, the excitement of the day. But as they settled into their room, she noticed how quiet he had become. He wasn't the same man she had married just hours before. His eyes seemed far away, his smile less genuine, and his words were laced with something she couldn't quite place. She tried to brush it off, telling herself she was overthinking things. This was their honeymoon, after all, the start of their new life together. But the more she tried to ignore it, the more the feeling grew. There was something wrong, something hidden beneath the surface, and she couldn't escape it. The paradise they had arrived at didn't feel like an escape anymore. It felt like a trap. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the beach, the unsettling feeling deepened. She looked at her husband again, and for the first time, she wondered, what was he hiding? What was he not telling her? The paradise that once seemed perfect now felt like the calm before a storm, and she had no idea how close that storm really was. On the second night, they sat down to enjoy a quiet dinner together, the soft glow of the candlelight flickering between them, casting long shadows across the table. The evening was supposed to be perfect, just like the rest of their honeymoon. The air was warm, the food delicious, and for a brief moment, everything seemed right in the world. But then, without warning, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting ever so slightly. It wasn't the usual smile she had come to expect from him. His brow furrowed, and for a split second, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. Without saying a word, he excused himself and stood up, walking away from the table. She watched him as he moved, her gaze following him across the room. The sound of the restaurant buzzed around her, but her focus remained on him. He stepped out of earshot, and as soon as he answered the phone, his voice lowered to a whisper. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone of his voice sent a chill down her spine. It was sharp, tense, almost as if he was trying to hide something. What bothered her even more was the way he was acting. He wasn't just speaking quietly. He was looking around, his eyes darting nervously from side to side. It was as though he was afraid someone might be listening, watching. She told herself she was imagining things, but the knot in her stomach tightened with every passing second. She tried to focus on the sounds around her, the clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of conversations, but all she could hear was the faint edge in his voice. It was as if the man she had married, the man she trusted with her heart, was someone else entirely in that moment. Who was he talking to? And why did it feel like he was hiding something? Her thoughts raced as she watched him. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, speaking in hushed tones, his body tense, as if the conversation was more than just a casual check-in. She couldn't help but wonder if there was something he wasn't telling her. Was he in trouble? Was there something in his past he hadn't shared with her? When he finally returned to the table, he was smiling. The same smile she had fallen in love with. But it didn't reach his eyes. He sat down quickly, as if nothing had happened, and casually reassured her that everything was fine. "It was just a work call," he said. "Nothing to worry about." But the words felt hollow, like a script he had rehearsed. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, to believe that this was just a small, insignificant moment. But the doubt had already begun to creep in, like a shadow growing longer in the fading light. The smile he gave her didn't feel genuine. His eyes, though calm on the surface, seemed distant. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, hanging between them like a storm waiting to break. Her mind raced with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. Was it really just a work call? Or was there something more? Something he was hiding from her? She tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming back, louder and more persistent with every passing second. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. She tried to focus on the food, the conversation, anything to distract herself from the unease growing inside her. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The paradise they had arrived at now felt like a mask, hiding a truth she wasn't ready to face. As they finished their meal and the waiter cleared their plates, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And deep down, she knew that whatever it wasn't just going to disappear. It was only the beginning. Later that night, as the soft hum of the resort faded into the background, she found herself wide awake. Her mind refused to settle, the events of the day replaying over and over in her head. The phone call, his strange behavior, the way he seemed so distant, so different. She tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The silence of the room felt suffocating, and the shadows seemed to grow longer with each passing minute. She glanced at her husband, lying next to her, his back turned to her in a peaceful sleep. But even in his slumber, she couldn't shake the unease that clung to her. Something was off. She knew it. And tonight, she couldn't ignore it any longer. With a quiet breath, she reached for his phone, which lay charging on the nightstand. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. She had never been one to snoop, never had a reason to. But tonight, something inside her urged her to look. She needed to know, needed to find the truth. She unlocked the phone, her heart pounding in her chest as the screen lit up. The usual apps, messages, and notifications greeted her. But then, her eyes caught something. A name that stood out among the rest. A name that made her stomach twist. It wasn't a work contact or a friend from college, or even someone she could easily explain away. This name felt wrong. It was a name she had never heard before, but it triggered something deep within her, a sense of dread that she couldn't ignore. Her breath hitched as she tapped on the message thread. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the conversation. The words were brief, cryptic, and chilling. There was talk of plans, of arrangements, of things that didn't belong in a honeymoon conversation. She could barely make sense of it, but one thing was clear. This was not the man she thought she knew. This was not the man she had married. Her mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of the conversation. Names, locations, and codes she didn't understand, but the meaning was becoming painfully clear. The man she had married was involved in something dark, something criminal. The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, each revelation more horrifying than the last. The odd behavior, the secretive phone call, the way he had been so distant. They weren't just coincidences, they were signs. Signs that pointed to a past he had kept hidden from her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she read more. The messages grew darker, more sinister. There were references to a past she couldn't even begin to comprehend. A past that involved danger, deception, and violence. And the worst part? It wasn't just a distant past. It was a present. A present that her husband had been living right under her nose. She could feel the blood drain from her face as she stared at the screen, her mind struggling to make sense of it all. How could she have missed this? How could she have married a man who had been hiding this from her? The questions spiraled, each one more terrifying than the last. What had she gotten herself into? Was this a mistake she could never undo? The more she read, the more the room seemed to close in on her. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the air grew thick with fear. Her mind raced with the possibilities, each one darker than the last. Was he dangerous? Was she in danger? Was everything she had believed about their life together a lie? The puzzle was falling into place, but the image it was forming was too horrifying to comprehend. She had married a man with a past so dark, so twisted, that it threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew. And now, as the weight of the truth settled over her, she realized something even worse. She was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Her heart hammered in her chest as she slowly put the phone back on the nightstand, her hands still shaking. She lay back down beside him, her mind racing, her body frozen in fear. The man lying next to her was no longer the man she had married. The man lying next to her was a stranger, and the paradise they were supposed to be enjoying had become a prison. And as the night stretched on, she couldn't help but wonder, how much danger was she really in? How far had he gone to hide the truth? And, most terrifying of all, was she already too deep into this nightmare to escape? By the third day, the weight of the truth had become unbearable. The tension between them had grown, thicker and more suffocating with every passing hour. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The signs were too clear, too undeniable. The man she had married, the man she had trusted with her heart, was hiding something far worse than she could have ever imagined. The silence between them had grown louder, as if the air itself was filled with the unsaid words, the truth that hovered just out of reach. Every glance, every small gesture from him now felt like a warning. She had tried to push it all away, tried to convince herself that she was overthinking, that it was just the stress of the honeymoon, the unfamiliar surroundings, the isolation. But deep down, she knew. She knew something was terribly wrong. And then, it happened. They were sitting together, the sun beginning to set over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the resort. The peaceful sound of the waves crashing against the shore should have been soothing, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. He had been distant all day, avoiding her gaze, his mind seemingly elsewhere. And then, without warning, he turned to her, his expression grave. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Her stomach dropped. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when he would finally confess. but nothing could have prepared her for the words that followed. He wasn't just a man with a dark past. He wasn't just someone who had made mistakes. No, what he told her shattered everything she thought she knew about him. He was a killer. The words hung in the air between them, cold and heavy, like a weight that she couldn't lift. She stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he had just said. A killer. Her husband. How could this be? How could the man she had married, the man she had trusted with her life, be capable of such a thing? He spoke of a history buried deep in the past, of a life he had left behind, a life that had been filled with violence, deceit, and death. He told her of things he had done, things that haunted him, things he thought he had escaped from. But now, it seemed, the past had caught up with him. The truth had come to light, and there was no escaping it. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. She wanted to scream, to run, to wake up from this nightmare. But the reality of his confession was too much. It was too real, too terrifying. She had married a man who had killed, a man who had taken lives, a man whose dark past had been hidden from her, buried beneath a mask of charm and love. The honeymoon, once a dream, had turned into a terrifying nightmare. The paradise they had arrived in now felt like a prison, the walls closing in on her as she realized the truth. She was trapped with a killer, a man who had been lying to her from the very beginning. And the worst part, she didn't know if she could trust him anymore. Could she even trust her own judgment? The dream had ended, and the nightmare had begun. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream, to escape the nightmare that was unfolding before her. But deep down, she knew there was no way out. No matter how hard she tried to deny it, the truth had already set in, and there was no turning back. They were in a foreign country, far from everything she knew, isolated from the world she had once felt safe in. The beauty of the resort, the tropical paradise they had arrived at, now felt like a cruel joke. The sun-kissed beaches, the crystal-clear waters, they were all a facade, a perfect mask hiding the terror beneath. There was no one to trust, no one to turn to. She was alone, alone with him. Every time she looked at him, her heart twisted. The man she had married, the man who had promised her forever, was still there. His face the same, his smile the same, his touch the same. But now, there was something else in his eyes, something dark, something monstrous. It was like a veil had been lifted, revealing a side of him she had never seen before, a side that terrified her, a side that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. Was this the man she had fallen in love with? Or had she been blinded by her own desires, by the dream of a perfect life? Now, when she looked at him, she didn't just see the man she had married. She saw a monster, a killer, a man capable of terrible things. And the worst part? He was the one she was trapped with, the one she couldn't escape. The walls were closing in, and with each passing second, the reality of her situation became more suffocating. The paradise they had come to was no longer a refuge. It was a prison, and she was locked inside it, with no way out. Her breath quickened as she realized how truly helpless she was. There was no one to help her, no one to hear her cries. She was alone, isolated, trapped with a man who had been hiding his dark truth from her all along. The dream had turned into a nightmare, and there was no escape, no way to undo what had been done. The walls seemed to press in on her, and the air grew thick with fear. She was suffocating, and no matter how hard she tried to fight it, she knew deep down that there was no way out, no way to escape the nightmare she had unwittingly walked into. As the days passed, her worst fears slowly began to take shape. What she had once dismissed as a distant, buried part of his past was now a living, breathing nightmare. His past wasn't just a secret. It was a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode, threatening to destroy everything in its path. And she was standing right in the middle of it, unable to escape, unable to outrun the consequences. Each passing day brought a new wave of dread. The phone calls, the cryptic messages, the sudden shifts in his mood. It all pointed to one thing. His past was catching up with him, and with it, the danger that had once been buried deep was now rising to the surface. The law was closing in, and there was nowhere for them to hide. He was becoming more unpredictable, more desperate. His charming smile, the one that had once made her feel safe, now felt like a mask hiding a man who would stop at nothing to protect the secrets that had bound him in darkness for so long. She could see it in his eyes, the fear, the anger, the way he would look over his shoulder as if he could feel the weight of the law bearing down on him. He was ready to fight, ready to do anything, even if it meant dragging her down with him. He had been hiding the truth for so long, and now it was all coming undone. But the worst part? She wasn't just an innocent bystander. She wasn't just a victim of his past. No, she was now a part of it. She was caught in the middle of a deadly game, a game where the stakes were her very life. He had made her his prisoner, trapped between the love she had once felt for him and the overwhelming fear that now consumed her every waking moment. She had no choice but to stay, to play along, to pretend that everything was normal. But inside, she was breaking. She was drowning in the weight of the truth, torn between the love she had once known and the terrifying reality of the man she had married. She was trapped, and the walls were closing in faster than she could escape. With every passing hour, the weight of her situation grew heavier. Her mind raced, her heart pounded, and she couldn't escape the terrifying choice that lay before her. She was trapped, caught in a web of fear and uncertainty, and every decision felt like a step closer to an irreversible fate. Stay with him, the man she had married, the man she had once trusted with her life, or risk everything to escape. It was the kind of choice that no one should ever have to make. But the longer she stayed, the more she realized how impossible it was to ignore the truth. He wasn't the man she thought he was. He was a killer, a dangerous man with a past that was quickly catching up to him. And with every passing moment, the danger surrounding them grew more real, more imminent. But even if she fled, where could she go? She had no family nearby, no friends who could help her, no safe place to run to. She was in a foreign country, isolated, with no one to trust. Every road seemed to lead to the same dead end. The law was closing in on him, and she was caught in the middle, a pawn in a game she never asked to play. Could she trust the authorities? Could she trust anyone? She wasn't sure anymore. What if they were already too late? What if they had been watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike? What if the man she had once loved had already buried her in a world so dangerous, so far beyond her understanding, that there was no escape? She felt like she was suffocating, the walls closing in tighter with every passing minute. There was no way out, no way to undo what had been done. And the truth was sinking in. There was no turning back. Every moment she spent with him felt like a step closer to the edge. She could feel the fear creeping up on her, wrapping around her heart like a vice. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think straight. The world around her was spinning out of control, and she had no idea what to do next. Stay or leave, trust or run. Each choice felt like a death sentence, and in the end, it didn't matter, because she knew one thing for sure. Whatever decision she made, it would change everything. And there was no going back. The honeymoon that began with love and hope had turned into something unrecognizable. What was supposed to be the start of a lifetime of happiness, the beginning of forever, had ended in tragedy. The woman who had once dreamed of a perfect life, a life filled with love and joy, now found herself trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Every moment, every hour, felt like a suffocating weight on her chest. The man she had married, the man she had trusted with her heart, had become a stranger. And not just any stranger, but a man whose dark past had swallowed him whole, dragging her down into the abyss with him. She had been blinded by love, by the dream of a perfect life, and now she was paying the price. She had tried to escape, to outrun the truth, but there was no escaping him. There was no escaping the life she had unwittingly married into. The paradise they had once found themselves in now felt like a prison, the walls closing in on her with every passing day. She had no way out, no way to undo the choices she had made. The dream had shattered, and in its place, only the cold, harsh reality remained. As the days went by, she realized something she had never wanted to admit. Sometimes there are no happy endings. Sometimes the choices we make lead us down paths we can never return from. The love she had once felt for him now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the overwhelming fear and regret that consumed her. She had trusted him, believed in him, and now she was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The honeymoon was over. The life she had dreamed of was gone. And all that remained was the painful truth that sometimes there are no second chances, no escape, no way to undo the past, only the cold, harsh reality of the choices we make.